January 1943, somewhere over the Aleutian Islands. You did not wake up this morning planning to die in an airplane the U.S. Army casually refers to as a flying coffin. But here you are, buckled into the cockpit of a Bell P-39 Airacobra, a fighter so hated American pilots refuse to touch it unless someone threatens them with paperwork. The engine is behind your seat, like a ticking death blender. The propeller is in front. In between, you. A meat sandwich powered by gasoline and a questionable understanding of aerodynamics. If you're new here and you want real, immersive World War II stories that put you in the cockpit, in the trenches, and behind enemy lines, subscribe now. Most people scroll past history, but you're here to experience it. So hit subscribe and like the video. The mission's only just begun. Your training officer said, "Don't worry, she handles beautifully at low altitude." Translation, you will die if you climb higher than a church steeple. And now everything smells like cold metal, rubber, and dread. The Bell P-39 vibrates like a washing machine on cocaine. Every rivet in the cockpit screams, "You made mistakes." You're gripping the control stick so hard, your knuckles have turned into ghosts. You can feel the mid-engine thumping behind you, like you're riding a lawnmower possessed by a demon. You mutter into your oxygen mask, "Why do we even fly these things?" The co-pilot says the quiet part out loud, "Because the Army won't let us throw them away." The Bell P-39 was sold as a revolutionary weapons platform. Mid-engine layout, tricycle landing gear, sleek profile. And the marketing brochure conveniently forgot to mention the part where they removed the turbocharger. So, at altitude, the place where fighter planes usually live, the Airacobra simply gives up. It gasps, it wheezes, it dies. The Germans learned fast. If a P-39 tries to climb, follow it. Gravity will finish the job. The Airacobra doesn't dogfight. It dog sinks. But the engineers were so proud. They said, "We put the engine behind the pilot for balance. It's innovative," they said. Meanwhile, pilots everywhere called it the flying coffin. Your squadron commander tried to reassure everyone by saying, "Gentlemen, statistically speaking, only a few of you will explode." Motivational speeches were not his gift. It gets worse. The Airacobra carries a 37mm cannon in the nose, a weapon so large it looks like someone shoved a small artillery piece into the front of the plane. First time you fired it on the runway, the recoil nearly made the plane reverse. On paper, it sounded cool. Your aircraft is a sniper rifle. In reality, your aircraft is a jackhammer with wings. The squadron tried to fire the cannon during training. The gun jammed. The mechanics hit it with a wrench. The cannon fired again, and the recoil shut the engine off. 10 seconds of quiet. 10 seconds of pure existential panic. Someone wrote in his diary, "The cannon works. The engine stops. We fall." American pilots hated this thing so much, they'd rather fly anything else. One pilot traded his Airacobra for a Jeep. A Jeep with 4 wheels, no wings. He said, "Statistically, the Jeep kills fewer people." Back to you. You're flying low over the ocean, trying not to think about how the cockpit canopy has the structural integrity of a soda bottle. Wind buffets the airframe. The controls feel mushy. The engine coughs behind you like an asthmatic beer drinker. Radio crackles. "Unknown aircraft, 3 o'clock. Your stomach folds inward. You bank the P-39 into a hard turn. The wings vibrate so violently your teeth may qualify for veteran benefits. 2 Japanese Zero fighters drop out of the cloud layer like ghosts. Elegant, deadly. Their pilots trained for dogfighting. Yours trained to survive your own airplane. The Zero pilots spot you. They laugh, because everybody knows the P-39 can't climb. If you pull up, you stall. If you stall, you die. This is the Airacobra's entire tactical manual. Never climb, never stall. Never think about how bad your life choices were. You squeeze the trigger. Bang! The 37mm cannon kicks with the force of God punching your spine. The plane doesn't fire. It lurches. The nose dips. Altitude spills like loose change. Then, impact. The shell slams into one of the zeros. The aircraft disintegrates like wet paper. Pieces of aluminum rain past your canopy. You don't celebrate. You are too busy preventing the airplane from flipping upside down and becoming a speedboat. Your co-pilot screams, "Stop firing the cannon! The wings hate it!" And somewhere, 6,000 miles away, Soviet pilots are begging to get their hands on this exact plane. They don't see a flawed fighter. They see a monster, built for the one thing they need most: killing Nazis at low altitude. Where it turns out, this airplane is perfect. Imagine being a German intelligence officer in 1943, coffee in hand, war maps everywhere, only to discover that the Royal Air Force isn't decorating their bombers with sharks, skulls, or angry pinup girls. No. They're painting garden gnomes, bright red hats, cheerful smiles, one of them literally mooning the camera. Welcome to the most unserious moment in the deadliest war in history. And the best part? It worked. The Luftwaffe, the same military that engineered the V-2 rocket, lost their minds trying to decode what they called the Gnome pattern. Pilots hesitated before attacking. Intelligence officers wrote reports about gnomes with fishing rods. And one ace said encountering a gnome-painted bomber felt like being mocked by a laughing ghost. Not exactly the psychological dominance Hitler was going for. Before we get deeper into the story of how a $2 garden statue broke German military logic, punch the like button and subscribe, because we're just getting started, and YouTube only shows these videos to people who enjoy unhinged history. You're watching Beyond the Trenches. Strap in, because this is the story of how the RAF accidentally invented psychological warfare with a garden gnome. It started as a joke. Pure, stupid, glorious humor. Peter Nobby Clark buys a tiny ceramic garden gnome on leave for the price of 2 sandwiches and a warm beer. Somehow, this lifeless lawn ornament becomes the most disruptive psychological weapon of 1943. Clark's ground crew paints the gnome, Reginald, on the nose of their Lancaster bomber with the same loud clown color palette as the original. It looks ridiculous, like someone glued a Home Depot flyer onto a 30-ton engine of death. Then they go to war with it. January 23rd, 1943, Dusseldorf rail yards. The crew scores 3 victories. They don't die. They don't get lost. They cause at least one German officer to doubt reality. They land at 0347, exhausted, smoke-stained, and every crew on the airfield crowds around, not to congratulate them for surviving, but to admire the gnome. Within a week, 7 Lancasters at the base are rocking gnome nose art. Within a month, entire squadrons are deploying cartoon lawn ornaments as unofficial RAF doctrine. Somewhere in Berlin, a man with a clipboard will soon question his life choices. Because by spring 1943, German intelligence starts intercepting reports describing the Gnome bombers. They analyze them, they categorize them, they develop theories. This is where the story leaves the runway and starts climbing into pure insanity. Enter the Luftwaffe.
German intelligence ran like a machine. Everything labeled, sorted, indexed, filed. If a bomber had shark teeth, intimidate. If a pilot had 23 kill marks, avoid. If a squadron had the same emblem, track patterns. It worked on logic. Then, boom, a gnome appears. Then 7. Then an entire squadron of garden fairies armed with fishing rods. The system sputters. Major Hayo Hermann, architect of Germany's ruthless night fighter doctrine, writes later that the Gnome created analytical chaos. Imagine being an officer tasked with protecting the Reich from strategic bombers, and now you're filing documents that read, Gnome number 14, fishing rod, drunk. One Halifax bomber even had a gnome riding a bomb like a rodeo cowboy. If Quentin Tarantino directed a war documentary, it would start here. The Germans respond like Germans. We must organize this. They literally create Gartenswerk Index, the Garden Gnome Index. They photograph gnome bombers. They chart gnome patterns. They interrogate POWs about hat colors. Flight Lieutenant Robert Palmer, shot down over Hamburg, is grilled for 45 minutes about why his gnome wears a blue hat instead of red. His explanation? Nigel preferred blue. The Germans write this down like it's code. Translated, stamped, archived. A war is happening, and someone in Berlin is typing. Subject's gnome indicates preference for blue. Investigate. The accidental mind warfare. By summer 1943, the RAF finally realizes what's happening. The Germans aren't laughing, they're panicking. Wing Commander Guy Gibson, yes, the Dam Busters guy, starts encouraging gnome art. Jerry seems unsettled by our garden friends. British translation, if this annoys the Nazis, do more of it. This wasn't strategy. No committee approved it. No briefing, no psychological warfare manual. It just happened. Ordinary men, flying nightly into hell, found one stupid thing that made the world feel a little less dark. And that tiny rebellion broke a machine built on hierarchy, order, and fear. Because the Luftwaffe, efficient, rigid, serious, could handle bombs, fire, skilled pilots, but they could not handle absurdity. Professor R.V. Jones, head of British Scientific Intelligence, puts it perfectly. The enemy expends more effort trying to understand what doesn't matter than countering what does. The gnomes weren't just nose art. They were the weaponization of nonsense. And nothing in the German playbook prepared them for that.
Now picture this. June 16th, 1943. Cologne, night raid. Oberleutnant Weberhelm Jonen, the Luftwaffe's golden boy, 34 kills, a hunter of bombers, a man whose full-time job is erasing aircraft from existence. He stalks a Halifax through moonlit cloud cover, lines up the perfect firing solution, finger on the trigger, then his radar operator says the words no German pilot should ever hear. It has a gnome. Jonen freezes. Not because he's scared, not because he's merciful, because his brain simply refuses to process garden decor on a weapon of war. Why would they mark it that way? Is it a decoy? A special operations aircraft? 3 seconds of existential confusion. That's all. 3 seconds. Just long enough for the Halifax tail gunner to spot him and spray the night sky with .303 rounds. Jonen peels off, swears, flies home, and quietly pretends this never happened in his combat report. But years later, he writes about it in his memoir, because the Gnome got inside his head. Not fear, not intimidation, cognitive friction. War isn't clean. It's chaos, smoke, sweat, and decisions that happen faster than thought. If you hesitate for even one heartbeat, you die. And suddenly, every German pilot has to deal with a new threat type: the tactical garden gnome. By August 1943, the RAF has evolved the joke into an art movement. Sergeant Ronald Lance, unofficial Leonardo da Gnomeci, starts painting entire gnome narratives on bomber noses. Gnomes fishing in bomb craters, gnomes gardening in the ruins of the Ruhr. One gnome straight up mooning the Third Reich. Each masterpiece takes about 4 hours using loud, clown-colored enamels that clash violently with RAF camouflage. Squadrons develop their own gnome doctrines. Squadron, gnome tradition. 103, red hats only, no exceptions, discipline. 76, all gnomes must carry fishing rods, because why not? 460, Australian, gnomes with boomerangs. The chaos intensifies. No pattern, no logic, no structure, which is exactly why the Germans can't solve it. You can't crack a code that doesn't exist. Meanwhile, in the Air Ministry, some pencil pusher tries to write a rule banning gnomes. The official response? Air Ministry Order 1098 basically says, "We don't get it, but morale is up, so continue your goblin activities." Air Chief Marshal Arthur I. Bomb Cities Before Breakfast says it even better. "If painting Mickey Mouse on a Lancaster helps my crews come home, I don't care. If it bothers Jerry, even better. If it does both, it's the cheapest weapon we've got." Cost of a gnome? 4 hours of a ground crew member's time. 5 shillings worth of paint. Cost to the Luftwaffe? Hundreds of man-hours analyzing hat colors. A bargain. The German perspective gets even worse. Captured intelligence reports show that out of 16 bombers spotted in a single night, 13 were described purely by their gnome markings. Controller's radio, engaging a Lancaster with a gnome. But the problem is, there are dozens of gnome Lancasters, which means no one knows who's attacking what anymore. Downed RAF crews are interrogated. What do the gnomes mean? Are they magic symbols? Are you cursing our pilots? Meanwhile, the British airmen are like, "Sir, we just thought it was funny." And then the realization hits. The gnomes are meaningful and meaningless at the same time. They boost morale. They have zero tactical purpose. The contradiction is unsolvable.
Gnome art peaks in late 1943, fades in 1944 as the war shifts to daylight bombing and standardized paint jobs. By the war's end, only 15% of aircraft still carry nose gnomes. The last one, a Lancaster from 103 Squadron, flies its final mission on March 22, 1945. Reginald III survives the war and retires to the RAF Museum in Hendon, where he quietly judges tourists. Why did something so stupid work so well? Because the German war machine was powerful, but fragile. They could calculate fuel loads, bomber streams, ground radar intercept solutions, but they could not handle irrationality. Every hour spent analyzing gnomes was an hour not spent analyzing real threats. Every tiny pause was a moment of life for an RAF crew. Today, militaries call this PSYOP. Back then, it was just a tired airman who needed a laugh. A joke became disruption. Absurdity became strategy. Humanity became a weapon. The Germans expected cold, efficient warriors. What they got were cheerful garden gnomes painted on bombers that still killed with ruthless precision. That contrast Lethal capability wrapped in absurd humor was more psychologically destructive than any skull, shark mouth, or pinup girl. Because even in hell, the RAF remembered something crucial. They were still human. They could drop bombs at midnight and still laugh at a stupid ceramic gnome. And if that also drove the Nazis insane? Bonus.
When the war finally coughed out its last tired breath and Europe was left smoking like a burnt-out engine, governments began the quiet cleanup. Medals handed out, paperwork stacked into mountains, trauma swept under emotional carpets. But the gnomes did not retire gracefully. The RAF barked equipment, archived flight logs, dismantled bases, and somewhere in the labyrinth of British logistics, a clerk stared at a form that genuinely included the line, disposition of nose gnome, museum, or incineration. British bureaucracy at its peak. Meanwhile, in 1946, Allied interrogators sat across from defeated German officers expecting revelations about secret weapons, radar networks, and high command strategies. Instead, more than one German officer leaned forward and whispered, "So, what was with the gnomes?" One swore they were part of a British magic ritual. Another insisted the gnomes changed color in flight. A third, exhausted from losing a war and his sanity, admitted softly, one should not be attacked by a bomber that smiles. Imagine fighting a terrifying flying slaughterhouse powered by 4 roaring Merlin engines, then feeling mocked by its cheerful gardening mascot. Reginald III, the final surviving gnome, didn't go down with his Lancaster. The crew protected him like royalty. When the aircraft was scrapped, someone physically unbolted the nose panel and smuggled it away until the world stopped exploding. Today, Reginald sits behind glass at the RAF Museum in Hendon, staring out like an aging rock star who used to headline night raids over the Ruhr. Children point. Tourists smile. Old RAF veterans? They salute. Because it wasn't paint. It was identity. A tiny rebellion against death.
Eventually, military doctrine caught up to what these tired young men already knew. Absurdity is a weapon. Not every strike has to destroy steel. Some only need to destroy certainty. Decades later, a U.S. Army manual would formalize what the RAF stumbled into accidentally. Confuse the enemy faster than he can make decisions. The Luftwaffe operated on precision, range calculations, grid references, fuel loads, kill ratios. The RAF hit them with chaos, nonsense, and obnoxious clown colors. To British air crews, the gnome meant comfort. To German analysts, it meant corruption of order. Even modern psychologists study it as cognitive destabilization under absurd stimuli. Translation: the gnome broke their brains. There's a story buried deep in an oral history archive. A Lancaster returns after a brutal night mission. Engine shredded, hydraulics bleeding, flak holes stitched through the fuselage like bullet tattoos. The crew crawls out, shaking. Ground mechanics swarm the aircraft, but the nose artist ignores the damage. He climbs a ladder and presses his hand against the gnome's painted hat. Still there, still smiling. He climbs down and whispers to the pilot, "He made it. So did you." It wasn't superstition, it was a lifeline. History books obsess over maps and generals, but they skip the part where war sometimes hinges on something utterly stupid. Because stupidity
chosen stupidity is a form of resistance. The RAF didn't paint gnomes to win the war. They painted them to stay human. And nothing terrifies an oppressive system more than people who refuse to surrender their humor. In the late 1950s, museum staff asked the surviving 103rd Squadron veterans whether the faded paint on Reginald should be restored. The old men, once boys who flew through fire, wrote back, "Touch the gnome and we riot." So he stayed, still ridiculous, still defiant. Proof that even in hell, someone had the audacity to say, "Yeah, let's paint a smiling garden goblin on our war machine." Because if you can laugh while flying into flak and tracer fire, you're already undefeated. Wars end, people fade, stories evaporate into textbooks. But somewhere in a quiet museum in London, behind a sheet of polished glass, a gnome stares back, smiling, absurd, immortal. A reminder that insanity can be resistance, humor can be armor, and in a world that tries to turn men into machines, a painted lawn ornament can still whisper, "No, you don't own my soul."